What are the INFJ functions? Where do they come from? And how do they relate to the preferences? Stick around for today's show because we're going to answer all of those questions and more. You probably already know a good deal about your preferences because they can tell you a lot about your personality. As an INFJ, you are introverted, so you recharge alone and you enjoy quiet, and you do most of your thinking inside your head. You're an intuitive. You like the big picture. You enjoy looking for meaning and making connections and finding patterns, and you enjoy ideas and theories. As a feeler, you consider how your decisions affect other people, and you consider your deeply held values. And then finally, as a judger, you prefer order, routine, structure, and like to have a plan for the most part. But there's a lot more to your personality than just these preferences, even though the preferences are quite helpful in and of themselves. But when you look at the preferences, they have alternate meanings and purposes. Namely, introversion and judging are what are called attitudes or orientations, because they tell you and other people how each personality type approaches the world. Introversion and extroversion, two opposite pairs, tell us what people focus on. Introverts focus on the inner world of thoughts and ideas, whereas extroverts focus on the outside world of people and opportunities around them. Judging and perceiving tell us how people prefer to structure or approach or order their world. So judgers, again, prefer order, whereas perceivers prefer more spontaneity. And there are other facets to that dichotomy as well. The last two preferences, intuition and feeling, are called functions. And they tell us a lot about you and your personality. Intuition and its opposite, sensing, tell us how you collect information. And they're called perceiving functions. So that might sound familiar because when you think of perceiving, you think of judging and perceiving. But intuition and sensing are both perceiving functions because they have to do with collecting information. Anytime you hear perceiving, in addition to perceiving and judging, think collecting information. Feeling and its opposite, thinking, on the other hand, are all about making decisions. And these two opposites are called judging functions. So again, you're probably thinking of the JP dichotomy, but there's more than meets the eye. So with judging functions, those are, again, feeling and thinking. And these 2 points are going to come into play in just a minute. So make sure that you keep them in mind because we can draw a connection between your 4 personality preferences and the 4 cognitive functions that make up your personality by using the perceiving and judging functions. Before we do just that, it can be helpful to know that the Myers-Briggs personality theory was derived from Carl Jung's cognitive functions. And Carl Jung, through observing people, came up with 8 cognitive functions, or what I like to call mindsets. He noticed that people saw the world a certain way or had chief or principal strengths. And those strengths include intuition, sensing, feeling, and thinking. You'll notice that 2 of them are perceiving functions and the other 2 are judging functions. And then from those functions, they are broken into the attitudes. So intuition has an extroverted and an introverted counterpart. The same thing is true of sensing. There's extroverted sensing, introverted sensing, extroverted feeling, introverted feeling, extroverted thinking, and introverted thinking. And each of these 8 functions takes on unique characteristics and really influences the way that people think and behave. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychologist, and Catherine Briggs picked up a copy of his book, Psychological Types. She and her daughter, Isabel Briggs Myers, translated into a work that was helpful to the hoi polloi or most people at large. So that's where we got the Myers-Briggs from. And from the 8 functions or cognitive functions, or what I like to call mindsets, Briggs and Myers, or Myers-Briggs, came up with the preferences that most people are familiar with and that you are probably familiar with as well. But that begs the question, how do we get the functions from the preferences? The first step is to look at the last preference. So it's either going to be J or P. In the case of the INFJ, it's a J. And this last preference will tell you what part of the personality is extroverted or shown to the world. If it's a J at the end of the personality, that means the person will extrovert or show the world a judging function. Now, remember that the judging functions are feeling and thinking. If it's a perceiving function at the end of the personality, then that means that person will extrovert or show the world intuition or sensing. So in the case of an INFJ, the INFJ will extrovert a judging function because INFJs are judgers. And the judging function for INFJs is feeling. So we're going to write feeling down, and we're going to put a small e to denote the attitude or orientation of that function. So extroverted feeling is part of an INFJ's functional stack. The second step is to look for the opposite. And by opposite, I mean, since we have already a judging function, then we need to have balance in the personality. We need a perceiving function to balance it out because everyone needs to both make decisions and collect information. When you look at an INFJ's personality, you see that the perceiving function is intuition. And also, since we need balance, since we have an extroverted function already, the opposite should be an introverted function. Now, part of the step involves going to the first preference. So you look at introversion or extroversion. If the person is an introvert, that means the function with an I after it is going to be the first function. If it's an E that's at the start of the personality, that means the first function will be a function with an E at the end of it. That's because every personality uses their favorite function in their favorite world, either introversion or extroversion. So since INFJs are introverts and introverted intuition has an I after it, that means that's the first function for INFJs. So when you're deriving a personality's cognitive functions from that personality type's preferences, you may need to rewrite the order of the cognitive functions. Step 3 is to find a balance between the second and third functions. Just like intuition and feeling are balanced in an INFJ's personality, and the first 2 functions include a perceiving function and a judging function, all depending on whether the personality type is a dominant perceiver or dominant judger. The middle 2 functions will have some balance as well. So the rule is that the second function and the third functions will be somewhat of opposites. They'll be opposites in that they'll be the opposite judging or perceiving function, and they'll also be used in the opposite attitude. But they're both going to be judging functions, or they're both going to be perceiving functions. So in the case of the INFJ is a feeler. So we know that the opposite is going to be thinking. And if it were the case that we were dealing with a perceiving personality and we had, say, intuition in the middle of the functional stack, we know that the opposite would be sensing, and we could rearrange all these. But again, you should always have the same type of function balanced between 2 and 3. So the opposite, again, of feeling is thinking. And then the opposite attitude of thinking is introversion. So INFJs, for their third function or their tertiary function, have introverted thinking. The fourth and final step is to balance off the personality. So similarly to how the middle two functions are balanced, the last two functions are going to be balanced as well. So since the middle two are both judging functions, the first and fourth functions are going to be perceiving. And again, if you're working with another personality type and the middle two are perceiving, then the first and fourth would be judging. This is the typical pattern. So I can look at the first function and see that an INFJ is a dominant intuitive. So the opposite perceiving function would be sensing. And again, you might just want to refer back to step one here. And the opposite attitude of introversion then would be extroversion. So INFJs have for their fourth function extroverted sensing. And by going through this four-step process, which can admittedly be quite confusing at first, you can figure out any personality type's functions, but you can also clearly see how the personality preference that an INFJ has connect to the cognitive functions that that person has as well. In sum, INFJs have four functions: introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, and extroverted sensing. And there's a lot of balance in the personality type, as hopefully you've been able to see. Originally, I thought that I could cover the INFJ functions in just one video, but when I started to delve into it, I quickly realized that this would be a multi-part series. So if you've enjoyed part one of the INFJ functions, then keep your eyes peeled for part two. To learn way more about your cognitive functions, grab a free copy of my recent book, The INFJ Personality Guide. I wrote this book to help you better understand the mindsets that drive your personality and make you tick. I also wrote it to help you overcome common challenges that most INFJs face, as well as to give you a strong sense that you're not messed up or broken, just different. To grab a free copy of this guide, text the letters INFJ to the number 444999 or visit ispeakpeople.com/INFJ-personality-guide, and I will post a link to that page in the description below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found it helpful. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, I encourage you to do so. I'm creating new content for INFJs just like you each and every week. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.